It is the most wonderful time of the year. Spooky season is upon us, and I've got my list for essential viewing this holiday season. Remember, it's just my list. I want to hear your list. Go ahead and comment below with what movies you deem absolutely essential for the Halloween season. One of the things I love about horror is the fact that it invites storytellers. It invites a lot of different people because it's affordable and it's an entryway to talking about a lot of different subjects. And that variety is very evident in my list. So let's get into it because, well,
It's Halloween. I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
starting off the list, we have Hell House LLC. This is a docu-style found footage paranormal movie. It follows a production company that is setting up for their big event at the Abaddon Hotel. And from the very beginning, chaos ensues. And it's a non-linear story showcasing everything that goes wrong as they try to set up at this supposedly haunted location. They realize they end up with a lot more than they bargained for. One of my favorite parts of this movie is, Pennywise needs to sit down because this gave me my favorite version of horror movie clowns ever. The uncanny effect that they are able to produce with the cinematography, with the costume, with the makeup, the whole nine yards. It is so well done and establishes basically the mascot for this entire series going forward. The whole thing gives major Halloween vibes. It's set in the East Coast. It's fall. We're set up in this haunted attraction location. If you're a fan of unique takes on found footage, check this one out. Next up, we have Hellfest. This is another one that is firmly set within the Halloween season. We follow a group of 20 somethings as they go into a scare attraction and chaos ensues. I'll be honest, I was skeptical when I saw this one for the first time, but the acting is strong, the effects are really good, and it actually dares to tell a story in the midst of some really cool kills. And fun facts, the designer for the mask for the killer in this movie was actually designed by the same guy who created the ghost face mask for Scream and the baby face mask for Happy Death Day. Next up, we are hitting up the classics, and I am breaking the rules a little bit. We've got Psycho parts 1 and 2. So, Psycho is a timeless classic. I will say, I understand how some people put the OG Psycho in the same boat as the original Friday the 13th. Once you understand the twist at the end, you can't unring that bell. I will say Anthony Perkins does an amazing job the entirety of the movie, and I do think that Psycho is a bit more nuanced and stands better on its own than OG Friday the 13th. But in my opinion, the best thing that Psycho gave us was the rest of the series. This is one of the most slept upon series in all of horror. Anthony Perkins wanted nothing to do with continuing to play Norman Bates past the first one. And so some time passed between Psycho 1 and 2. And that helps sell the fact that Anthony Perkins was away and incarcerated for the time that he was. And we are getting a reformed Norman Bates. He's trying to reimmerse himself back into everyday life. So it turns out that the Bates Motel has been turned into a seedy pay by the hour sort of place. And so he comes in, fires Dennis Franz, and he's trying to establish a regular life for himself. He's trying to have a job. And, well, the ghosts of his past aren't going to let that happen. And we get this psychological thriller that is so nuanced in the level of character work that's being displayed. And it picks up from the first one while still doing something original on its own. That the best way to enjoy Psycho Part 1 and 2 is to watch them together in one sitting. Next up, we have something for the whole family. We've got Halloween Town. This is a movie from the 90s that was essential viewing on the Disney Channel. And it's about a family of witches. It's about Marnie, who finds out that she's a witch. She stows away to Halloween Town, which is a town, as it says, that's all about Halloween all the time. And we watch as she's forced to learn her powers to help save the day. This is lighthearted fun for the whole family, but because of the vibe, because of the environment, it is perfect for getting you into the Halloween spirit. We are breaking away from specifically the Halloween vibes with our next pick, and that is the original Frankenstein. When you talk about the Universal Monster movies, this is a series of movies that each has a message. It relies on character work, it relies on the environment to tell the story, because we're talking about movies made in the 20s, 30s, 40s at the very dawn of cinema. And this movie is presented in a way at first as if it is a play, a stage performance, where you have the narrator coming out first that welcomes everybody and basically tells everybody that what you're about to see is horrific and all of that sort of stuff. And this is kind of like Exorcist. This is very much in a category of movie that, to watch it in a modern lens, you kind of have to take in the entirety of the experience while understanding what this meant for the people at that time that would be seeing it first, because this was horrific for the original audience. But it's Frankenstein. You've got Frankenstein's monster, and you are watching him explore what it means to be alive, to have an identity, to engage with the world around you, especially when everybody has already deemed you a monster. And this whole thing is so tragic and so beautiful and tells such a compelling story that, for my money, is the best adaptation outside of the original novel. The story is timeless. It's the modern Prometheus, flying too close to the sun sort of thing. And we have some of the pinnacle of monster movie acting with Boris Karloff. He's a legend. This whole era of horror gave us some of the best physical acting that we would see, because that was the soup of the day. That was what was most important at that time. So, with the acting, with the environment, with the set pieces, with the cast, this movie A plus and deserves a watch this Halloween season. Next up on the list, we have an entry that is a part of a particular favorite genre of horror for me, and that is cosmic horror. We are talking about The Thing. What else need be said about this movie that hasn't already been said? Cosmic horror, when done well, is so terrifying because it puts the viewer in the position of just sitting there waiting for the inevitable to happen. It's not like a masked killer that can be stopped. It's not like a creature that can be killed. It is just an immutable force of nature that you can do nothing about. And no, it's not the first movie to introduce the idea of doppelgangers, of body snatchers, that sort of thing. But I will absolutely advocate that it did it the best. And then you've got the ending. Who was the creature? Was anybody the creature? Did the creature survive? And this is another movie that is set at a time where practical effects were king. And so you have some of the coolest shots that have ever graced the big screen in the horror genre, especially with the creature itself and that scene of just sheer body horror. In my opinion, this is the best example of Lovecraftian adjacent storytelling brought to the big screen. Next up, we have seasonal favorite Trick or Treat. This movie takes place on Halloween night in a fictional town of Warren Valley, Ohio. The plot follows a non-linear narrative. It's an anthology series, and I have a particular soft spot in my heart for this style of movie making, namely because I grew up on stuff like The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, Unsolved Mysteries. If you don't realize what you are getting yourself into, it can be a little jarring to try and follow, but it relates four Halloween horror stories with a common element in them. And that is our trick or treating demon wearing orange footy pajamas with a burlap sack over his head named Sam. The character appears in each one of the stories whenever one of the other characters breaks a Halloween tradition. All right, geeks, this one's going to get me into trouble. Next up, we've got Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. The biggest sin that this movie commits is that it calls itself a Halloween movie. I really think that if this movie was just called Season of the Witch, it would be remembered as a cult classic of its time. This is the movie that tried to turn Halloween into an anthology series. Producers John Carpenter and Deborah Hill wanted to try and separate themselves from Michael Myers. They believed that character was done, and they believed that no more stories could be told. And so they wanted to try something new, with the idea being that the through line is each one of these stories was happening around Halloween. This one picks up in 1982, where a doctor is trying to put an end to the evil machinations of a cultist that has created a series of masks that each have a fragment of the Stonehenge stones that he stole within it. And the idea is that on Halloween proper, the kids wearing the masks, when exposed to the jingle that was going to play on TV right at midnight, would be sacrificed in a ritual. This movie, out of all of them on the list, sits in a particular category of not everything about this movie ages perfectly. So if you could put that aside, it's an interesting premise that I think on its own has legs, especially because it ends in a way that is still somber, that still has you asking questions, that still leaves you on a hook of was he successful or not? Next up, we have Korean horror cult classic Gonjiam Haunted Asylum. Now, my apologies. I am not great at pronunciations. So if I butchered that, please understand no disrespect was intended. I had heard about this movie because everybody in the horror community fell in love with this movie for a while, it seemed like. And I watched it with Mrs. Bearded Geek for the first time last year for our spooky season watch. And we were stunned. We are the type of people that really appreciate watching a movie that has plenty of background creepies, we call them. Something that draws you in visually while still telling the story and all of that sort of stuff. But especially for paranormal horror, if you have those subtleties that force you to ask the question, did I just see some is that is gold to us within the horror genre, and that is exactly what this movie gives you in spades. This follows the crew of a horror web series that travels to an abandoned asylum for a live broadcast, and they get much more than expected as it moves deeper inside the nightmarish old building. This is probably the most gruesome out of the movies listed so far, so keep that in mind. But once this movie gets off to the races, it is non-stop from that point to the end. So, final three essential movies. I'm not sure anyone is going to be incredibly shocked by these three, but we start off with the timeless classic 1978's Halloween. It's quintessential viewing. It's Halloween night. It's the shape. It's this simplistic but so well done story of just this immutable force of nature that is acting seemingly without rhyme or reason. It's an invasion of innocence because you're set in the late 70s, and this is supposed to be a night where, yeah,
I
sure,
guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
but it's also centered on this idea of innocence in the teenager sense, where you've got Lori who isn't distracted by all of these other influences, that sees what's going on around her, but also the innocence of the children that are just trying to enjoy Halloween and that being invaded by the shape. It's Halloween. You've just got to watch it. It's unwritten law. Number two, we have Hocus Pocus. Again, we've got a family friendly classic here, but a classic nonetheless. Fun facts: Mrs. Bearded Geek and I have actually been to the house where that was shot. And this movie does so much for bringing you into the time, giving you that Halloween spirit, being set and shot in Salem, which is a beautiful city, by the way. If you have a chance to go, absolutely go. And you have some of the campiest, most ridiculous, awesome acting from the Sanderson sisters. And it does a very good job of presenting historical fiction that is not disrespectful to the actual history of the area while also showcasing it in a different light. Last but certainly not least, we have my number one pick for the Halloween season, and that is 1996's Scream. This movie defined a whole generation of horror and set in motion a whole new life for the slasher genre. It is a movie created by mastermind and legend of the genre, Wes Craven, and is so nuanced and well done, shot in such a way. Each one of the cast members bringing so much life to these characters that you don't even need to worry about once you know who the killers are, you know what the twist is, then you get to transition into watching it to form your own opinions on who the killer was where, or what theories you have about why characters did different things like that. It's a movie that brings something new every single time that you watch it and really presents a new take on what had been a tired, run down form of horror storytelling. And with a new Scream movie on the way, reportedly next year, it's a franchise that is still alive and well. But for now, that's it. That's all. That's a wrap. Like I said, that's my list. You might not agree with it. Go ahead and list your recommendations for horror movies this Halloween season. Remember, stay spooky. And until next time, peace.